The pool had been James Mitchell's pride and joy for exactly 3 months. 2 weeks before closing on the house, he'd stood at the edge of the deep end with the inspector, listening to the man detail every maintenance requirement, every chemical balance, every structural quirk of the $15,000 renovation the previous owners had completed. James had nodded along, mentally adding the pool service contract to his expenses, already imagining summer afternoons floating on an inflatable raft with a cold beer. What he hadn't imagined was Corinne Hendricks. She'd appeared on the Saturday after his first week in the house, a woman in her mid-50s with the kind of aggressively maintained appearance that screamed divorce settlement and resentment. She wore a designer cover-up over an expensive one-piece swimsuit, designer sunglasses, and an air of absolute authority as she let herself through the side gate. James was inside, unpacking boxes in the kitchen when he heard the splash. He'd gone to the window, expecting maybe a neighborhood kid on a dare. Instead, he saw a woman, a stranger, doing a lazy backstroke through his pool, her manicured nails cutting through the water like she owned the place. Behind her, lounging on his pool chairs, also new, also expensive, were 2 other women equally relaxed, equally at home. He'd set down the box of plates and walked outside. "Hey," he called out, trying to keep his tone light. No point being hostile immediately. Maybe there was some neighborhood arrangement he didn't know about. Maybe the previous owners had made some kind of deal. "Can I help you?" The woman in the pool glided to the edge, pulling off her sunglasses with theatrical slowness. Her eyes were the color of ice water. "I'm Corinne Hendricks. I live next door." She pointed lazily toward the western fence line. "I've been using this pool for 2 summers. We have an arrangement." "An arrangement," James repeated. "With the previous owners. They were lovely. They understood that a pool should be shared with the neighborhood." She said it the way someone might describe an obvious fact, like gravity or the inevitability of death. "I come Tuesdays and Thursdays. My friends come Saturdays. It's really not a problem." James looked at the pool, then at Corinne, then at the 2 women on his chairs who were watching this interaction with the focused intensity of spectators at a tennis match. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm going to need you to get out of the pool." "Excuse me." "My pool, my property. You need to get out." Corinne's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, a brief, hot flash of fury. She pushed herself out of the water with aggressive elegance, water streaming off her body as she stood, that same casual confidence radiating from her like heat. "You'll change your mind once you understand how things work around here," she said, wringing out her hair. "The previous owners were intelligent enough to see the value in community harmony. I hope you will be too." She'd gathered her things, a Hermes tote, a Burberry cover-up, designer sandals that probably cost more than James's first car, and left with her friends without another word. But not before making eye contact with him one final time, a look that was somehow both dismissive and threatening. James told himself it was over. One confrontation, boundaries established, problem solved. He was spectacularly wrong. The next Tuesday, he came home from work to find Corinne and 2 different women in the pool again. He stood in his backyard for a moment, watching her float on an inflatable lounger like Cleopatra on the Nile, not even pretending to look worried about his presence. When she noticed him, she raised her wine glass in a mock toast. "You're home early," she called out. He called the police. The officer who came was polite but utterly unmoved by James's complaint. "She your neighbor?" "Yes." "She's got to be trespassing on your property?" "Yes." "Then you can ask her to leave, but unless she refuses and you've got witnesses, it's not really a police matter, sir." Corinne didn't refuse. She left calmly when confronted, removing herself from the water with the same theatrical grace as before, making sure James felt like he was the unreasonable one, the newcomer who didn't understand how neighborhoods actually worked, who didn't understand the unspoken social contracts that governed suburban life. But she always came back. Tuesday, Thursday, sometimes Saturday when her friends weren't busy. Once he came home to find her throwing a small gathering, 4 women, a cooler full of wine, and Bluetooth speaker playing Fleetwood Mac. They'd had a moment of awkward standoff before she coolly informed him that she'd tried to be reasonable and that some people didn't appreciate generosity. By week 3, James called a lawyer. The lawyer, a tired-looking man named Feldman who specialized in property disputes, had listened to the situation and given him the grim news. Technically, Karen was trespassing. But practically, small claims court wasn't going to move fast. Cease and desist letters were often ignored by people like Karen, and the problem with bullies was that they rarely folded when you pushed back through official channels. They just escalated. Install a camera system, Feldman had suggested. Document everything. File the police reports even if they don't do anything. Create a paper trail, and get a fence installed if you can. That's the only language people like this speak: infrastructure. People like what? Entitled people who have never been told no, and don't know how to handle it when someone actually does. So James had installed cameras. 4 of them positioned to capture the pool area, the back gate, the side property line. He'd called 3 fence companies and gotten estimates that made him wince. And he'd continued coming home to find Karen in his pool, though she was slightly more cautious now, always watching for his car, always prepared to glide out with that infuriating calm. It went on for another month. Then one Tuesday evening, James came home and found Karen alone in the pool. No friends, no wine, just her swimming aggressively like she was working something out of her system. She didn't get out when she saw him. Instead, she climbed out slowly, methodically, and walked toward him, leaving wet footprints on his Italian tile. "This is pathetic," she said, her voice low and cold. "Do you know how pathetic you're being? A successful man, and you're going to ruin his reputation because he won't share a pool. Not even use it, just share it. People around here know who I am. They know my family. They know about my situation. My ex-husband was a judge, and he left me with a house and a bitter taste in my mouth. And now I find someone who has everything, and he won't even give me Tuesday afternoons." James stared at her, dripping and shaking slightly, and for the first time he felt not anger at Karen's entitlement, but a complicated kind of pity. She looked suddenly older without her sunglasses, without her performance. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd been broken by something and had decided that the world owed her compensation. "I'm sorry you had a hard time," he said quietly. "But this is my property and I need you to stop using it." "I'm asking you," Karen said, and there was something close to desperation in her voice now. "I'm not trespassing anymore. I'm asking, friend to neighbor, can't you just—" "No," James said. It wasn't unkind, but it was absolute. "No, I can't." She left that night without another word. James stood in his backyard as the sun set, waiting for the relief to come. It didn't. Instead, he felt something closer to dread. People like Karen didn't just accept no. They just waited for another angle to play. He was right. The legal letter came 10 days later, delivered by a process server on a Friday morning while James was at work. His assistant buzzed him with the news, her tone suggesting she was delivering information about a funeral. When he read it, James understood why. Karen's lawyer, a legitimately impressive attorney named Rothstein, had filed a claim based on adverse possession. The argument was that Karen had been using the pool openly, continuously, and without objection from the previous owners for 2 full summers, and that this constituted an established easement over his property. The letter requested that James allow Karen continued access to the pool on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or face a legal challenge to determine whether she had any rights to the property use. It was absurd. It was also, apparently, something that had to be taken seriously. James called Feldman back with shaking hands. "Adverse possession," Feldman had said slowly. "She's claiming an easement. That's actually sophisticated. She's either smarter than she looks or her lawyer is feeding her very good advice." "Can she win?" "No, you own the house. You've clearly stated she's trespassing. The law is on your side. But she can make this expensive and time-consuming. That might be the point." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Feldman said, "sometimes bullies file suits not because they think they'll win, but because they know they'll make you bleed. Time, money, stress. Maybe she figures you'll get tired of fighting and just let her have Tuesday and Thursday." For 2 weeks, James considered it. Just letting her have the pool 1 day a week seemed insane, seemed like rewarding harassment. But the legal fees were stacking up. The stress was affecting his sleep. Every time his phone rang, his stomach clenched. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Rachel Coldwell reached out to him through LinkedIn. She worked in HR at a major pharmaceutical company in the city. She'd seen his profile and wanted to meet for coffee to discuss a potential job opportunity. James, grateful for the distraction and curious about the prospect, agreed. Rachel was sharp, brilliant, actually. She had a firm handshake, direct eye contact, and the kind of conversational style that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. Within 15 minutes, James realized the coffee wasn't really about a job. It was about something personal. "Corinne Hendricks is your neighbor," she said. It wasn't a question. James's entire body went rigid. "How do you?" "Because she's my neighbor too, and because I remember what she did to my daughter." For the next hour, Rachel told him a story that made his hair stand on end. 3 years ago, Rachel's daughter Emma had been a junior at the local high school. She'd been on the debate team, maintained a 4 GPA, had been accepted early to Yale. She was, by every measure, an exemplary teenager. Corinne's daughter Bethany had been in Emma's grade. Less successful academically, less accomplished socially, and deeply envious of Emma's achievements. One night during a party at another kid's house, Bethany had accused Emma of assault. The accusation was false. Emma's lawyer, the same lawyer Corinne used now, Rachel pointed out, had investigated and found literally no evidence. No witnesses supporting Bethany's story, contradictions in her timeline, and clear documentation that Bethany had been drinking and had a documented history of making unfounded accusations against girls she disliked. But Corinne had pushed forward anyway. She'd threatened the other party's parents with lawsuits. She'd called the school board. She'd hired private investigators to harass people on her daughter's behalf. Most devastatingly, she'd convinced the school to open an investigation despite the complete lack of evidence. The investigation had taken 6 months. 6 months during which Emma's name was whispered in hallways, during which friends stopped calling, during which the Yale acceptance was quietly withdrawn with vague language about character concerns. Emma, traumatized and withdrawn, had taken a gap year. She was now in community college, studying accounting, her future derailed by a false accusation backed by her mother's pathological insistence on justice. The accusation had been formally dismissed when Bethany admitted to the lie, motivated by jealousy. But there were no real consequences. Bethany's record had been sealed. Corinne had simply moved on to her next grievance. "I'm telling you this," Rachel said quietly, "because you need to understand who you're dealing with. Corinne Hendricks doesn't lose. She just keeps fighting until someone else gives up. And when someone stands up to her, when someone actually holds her accountable, she destroys them." James felt the color drain from his face. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Rachel pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot of a social media post. It was from a local neighborhood group, posted by Corinne under a pseudonym that was barely concealed. It detailed how James had stolen the house from a lovely family and was hoarding a pool in a neighborhood that would benefit from community resources, and ended with a comment about how certain types of people just weren't built for suburban life. "She's turning the neighborhood against you," Rachel said. "She always does. She makes herself the victim. She makes her target the villain, and she keeps pushing until something breaks." "What do I do?" Rachel smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "You fight back, but not the way she fights. You use the truth, you use documentation, you use leverage, and you get her to show her hand." It was at that moment that James understood something had shifted. Corinne wasn't just his problem anymore. She was a problem that Rachel had been waiting 2 years to address. And Rachel Coldwell, he was beginning to understand, was precisely the kind of person who didn't forget. The legal battle stretched into summer. Feldman filed motions countering Corinne's adverse possession claim. He requested depositions. He documented every incident of trespassing with the camera footage. It should have been simple. James owned the property, Corinne did not. The law was clear. But Corinne's lawyer kept extending things, filing counterclaims, requesting arbitration. The case that should have been dismissed in a week dragged into a month, then 2 months. James's legal bills hit $20,000, then 30. James started documenting something else too, something that Rachel had suggested. He began tracking Corinne's activities, not her pool use, but her behavior in the neighborhood. He discovered she'd filed 6 complaints against neighbors in the last 2 years, 3 of which had been proven entirely baseless. He found social media posts from her under various accounts, each one slightly different from the last, each one carefully crafted to present her as a victim of one circumstance or another. He found the pattern. Corinne was a serial complainer, a professional victim, someone who had learned that if you made enough noise, pushed hard enough, and positioned yourself as the wronged party, you could bend reality to your will. Or at least, You could bend it far enough that people stopped pushing back. But James had helped now. Rachel, it turned out, had connections. She knew a journalist named Derek Huxley at the local paper who'd been interested in doing a story about frivolous neighborhood disputes. She knew a therapist who'd worked with other families Karen had targeted and was willing to discuss patterns. She knew a paralegal who specialized in tracking down seal records of accusations that had been dismissed. And she knew her daughter's case wasn't actually sealed quite as completely as Karen had believed. By mid-August, Derek Huxley had a story. It was published on a Thursday, the same day Karen's latest legal motion was scheduled to be heard. The headline read, "Suburban Justice: How One Woman Weaponized Accusations to Control Her Neighborhood." The article didn't name Karen, at least not directly, but the details were precise enough that anyone who knew her would recognize every element. The story of her daughter's false accusation against Emma Coldwell, the story of 3 other families who'd been targeted by similar complaints, all of which had been dismissed, the pattern of social media harassment under various accounts, the repeated pattern of filing baseless legal claims. It was exhaustively researched, carefully documented, and absolutely devastating. Karen's lawyer withdrew from the case that Friday. By Monday morning, she deleted her social media accounts. By Tuesday, her house was listed for sale. She was gone from the neighborhood within 6 weeks, moving to a different county where, presumably, no one yet knew her history. James stood in his backyard the week after she left, looking at his pool, his unmolested, Karen-free pool. He felt like he should feel victorious. Instead, he felt something more complex. Karen Hendricks was a bully and a liar. She had destroyed a girl's future out of spite. She'd caused real damage to real people. She deserved consequences. But watching her be dismantled by the machinery of public shame and legal pressure had revealed something uncomfortable. There was no version of this story where everyone came out okay. Karen had been broken by her divorce, by her daughter's failure, by the way life had refused to be fair to her. She'd responded by trying to rearrange the world to better suit her pain. It was terrible. It was also, in a way James didn't want to examine too closely, understandable. Rachel called him that Thursday evening. "She's gone," Rachel said simply. "I wanted you to know that I saw the moving truck. She's actually gone." "I know," James said. "I saw it too." There was a pause on the line. "You don't sound happy," Rachel said. "I don't know what I sound like," James admitted. "I got what I wanted. She's gone. The pool is mine. Legally, practically, in every way that matters, I won. So why does it feel like I should feel worse?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Because," she said finally, "winning against someone like Karen always tastes a little like poison, no matter how necessary it was. And the worst part is knowing that somewhere in the next town over, there's someone new she doesn't know yet. Someone new she'll eventually steal from in whatever way she's learned to steal. And will have one, but nothing will actually be fixed." James looked at his pool. The water was perfectly blue, untouched, his alone. "Thank you," he said, "for helping me, for doing what needed to be done, but Rachel, I hope your daughter knows that what happened to her wasn't her fault, and I hope she finds something better than this. Better than what we did to Karen, I mean. I hope she finds something that actually heals her." Rachel made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a cry. "Emma's transferring to Yale in the spring," she said. "After all this, the old dean who rejected her application retired. The new dean looked at her file and saw the whole story, saw what really happened. Yale wants her, fully funded. She's going to Yale, and she's going to be okay." "That's good," James said, and he meant it. "That's really good." After they hung up, James stood alone in his backyard as the sun set over his pool. The water reflected the pink and orange of the dying light. It was beautiful. It was his. And somewhere in the world, Karen Hendricks was starting over, trying to rebuild the machinery of her victimhood in a new neighborhood, with a new set of neighbors who didn't yet know to be wary. Winter came and went. The pool was drained, cleaned, closed for the season. James threw himself into renovating the rest of the house, the kitchen, the master bathroom, the overgrown landscaping. He stopped thinking about Karen Hendricks. He really did try. Then in late March, as he was preparing to reopen the pool for spring, he got a call from Rachel. "We need to talk," she said. No greeting, no preamble. Rachel sounded afraid. They met at the same coffee shop where they'd first discussed Karen. Rachel looked like she hadn't slept well in days. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around a mug of tea. "Bethany got into Yale," Rachel said without preamble. James blinked. Corinne's daughter, Bethany. Yes, early admission, full ride, and it's because of what happened to Emma. Rachel explained it slowly, the details emerging like something she'd been turning over in her mind for hours. After the article about Corinne had been published, after the story had gained local attention, Yale had become interested in the case. They'd reached out to the school district, requested all records related to both Emma and Bethany, and seen the full arc of what had happened. They'd been horrified. The administration had issued a formal apology to Emma. They'd reviewed their original admissions decision and seen it for what it was, a mistake based on information that had been weaponized against her. And they'd reached out to Emma directly, offering her a place in the next incoming class, full scholarship, no strings attached. But that wasn't the part that made Rachel afraid. Yale had also done something else. Intrigued by the case, they'd contacted Bethany directly. They'd wanted to understand from her perspective what had motivated her to make a false accusation. They'd wanted to explore whether the lie had been entirely her decision or whether her mother had encouraged, demanded, or orchestrated it. Bethany, terrified by the prospect of Yale and eager to please, had told them everything. How her mother had suggested the accusation. How Corinne had coached her on what to say. How Corinne had told her that winning against Emma would make them both feel better, would give them both a sense of justice for all the ways they'd been slighted in life. In short, Bethany had admitted to colluding with her mother to destroy another teenager's future. Yale, rather than revoke Bethany's admission, had taken a different approach. They'd offered her a full scholarship conditional on her completing extensive therapy, writing a detailed apology to Emma that would be included in her permanent record, and participating in a restorative justice program where she would directly address the harm she'd caused. Bethany had accepted. She was preparing to start at Yale, where she would spend 4 years being evaluated, monitored, and held accountable for what she'd done. That should be good, right? James asked, not understanding why Rachel was afraid. It would be, Rachel said quietly, if Corinne hadn't found out. It took Rachel 10 minutes to explain the sequence of events. Corinne had discovered that Bethany was going to Yale, had been thrilled initially, and then had learned the conditions attached. She'd read the news coverage that had emerged from Yale's investigation. She'd realized, finally, that her daughter had admitted to the truth, and that this admission had been reported to one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Corinne had lost it, completely lost it. She'd driven back to her old neighborhood, the one she'd fled 6 months earlier, and had gone to Rachel's house. She'd pounded on the door at 11 at night, screaming about how Rachel Coldwell had destroyed her family, and how her daughter would never recover from being forced to confess, and how she would make sure that Emma never got a second of peace. Neighbors had called the police. Corinne had been taken in for evaluation and released after 24 hours when the evaluating psychiatrist determined she wasn't an immediate threat to herself or others, just a woman having a temporary emotional crisis. That was 3 weeks ago, Rachel said. Since then, there have been 6 incidents. She's called the school where Emma's considering doing summer internship work and told them Emma is mentally unstable and a security risk. She's created fake social media accounts and has been posting things suggesting that Emma was complicit in her own supposed assault, that she's a liar and a manipulator. She's been calling Bethany at college, telling her that she's a traitor and a disappointment, and that Emma Coldwell has stolen her future. Rachel's voice cracked. She sent letters to Yale's administration claiming that Emma is blackmailing Bethany, that the entire restorative justice program is a hoax designed to allow Emma to abuse my daughter emotionally. Has Yale responded? James asked. They've been supportive, but... Rachel took a shaking breath. James, she escalated. On Saturday, she was arrested for showing up at Bethany's dorm room unannounced after driving 9 hours from wherever she's been living. She claimed she wanted to rescue her daughter. Security had to physically remove her. James felt his stomach drop. Is she pressing charges? Is she going to? She's been hospitalized on a psychiatric hold, court-ordered evaluation. But that's a maximum of 3 days, and then they'll release her unless she voluntarily admits herself. Rachel looked at him directly. And here's the part where you come in, and where I'm asking you for something I have no right to ask for. What? Bethany thinks her mother might hurt someone. She thinks if Corinne gets out and realizes that the restorative justice program is actually happening, that her daughter is actually going to Yale despite, or because of, The full exposure of what they did, Karen might do something violent. She's not rational anymore. She's completely unmoored. Rachel leaned forward. I need you to help me keep her away from my daughter, and I need you to do it quietly, legally, carefully. But I need you to help me make sure that Karen never hurts anyone again. James understood in that moment what Rachel was really asking. She wasn't asking him to harm Karen. She wasn't asking him to do anything illegal. But she was asking him to join a kind of coordinated effort to ensure that Karen's life became so complicated, so documented, so legally entangled, that she would have no choice but to step back from the obsession that was destroying her. How, he asked. By being part of a network, Rachel said. Other families she's targeted. There are at least 15 of us. We all have documentation. We all have stories. We all have reason to believe she's becoming increasingly unhinged. If we coordinate, if we all file restraining orders, if we all report her to the police when she violates them, if we all document every contact attempt, every threat, every weird appearance, then the system can actually do what it's supposed to do. It can protect people from someone who's actively dangerous. And if she complies, if she stops, then the restraining orders expire. The documentation becomes history. She gets to rebuild quietly and away from our lives. Rachel looked like she wanted to add more, but she didn't. She just looked at James across the table in the coffee shop, and he saw in her face the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting for their child's safety and sanity for far longer than was reasonable. Okay, James said, I'll do it, whatever you need me to do. The next month was bureaucratic and methodical and deeply strange. James worked with a lawyer to file a restraining order against Karen. The basis was her trespassing on his property, her harassment, her creation of a hostile environment. He provided the camera footage, the police reports, the legal documents from the previous case. The judge, reviewing the file, seemed almost bored. Of course he'd grant the restraining order. Karen had clearly harassed this man. It was standard. But that was just the beginning. Rachel coordinated with the other families. There was a woman named Susan whose house Karen had tried to buy out from under her through a series of escalating harassment campaigns. There was a man named David whose son Karen had accused of theft, a charge that had been proven false after 3 months of investigation. There was another family whose teenage daughter Karen had targeted with an anonymous cyberbullying campaign. Each of them filed restraining orders. Each of them documented everything. Together, they created a paper trail that was thick enough to constitute a legal picture of obsessive, harassing behavior. Karen, released from her psychiatric hold after 3 days of evaluation, the doctors finding her troubled but not acutely suicidal or homicidal, attempted to continue her campaign. She called Bethany. This was a violation of a restraining order that Rachel had obtained. She was arrested. She spent 2 days in jail. She was released with electronic monitoring. She showed up at Emma's workplace. She was arrested again. This time, the judge was less patient. Karen was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation as a condition of her release, with weekly check-ins, mandatory medication review, and compliance monitoring. By June, Karen had been arrested 4 times. She'd been released each time, but the machinery of the legal system had engaged. She couldn't seem to stop herself. The obsession with Emma, with Bethany, with the unfairness of her situation had completely consumed her rational mind. It was during Karen's 4th arrest that something shifted. She'd been found on a highway overpass near Emma's summer internship site, watching the parking lot below. She'd had binoculars. She'd had a notebook with detailed observations about Emma's schedule, her routines, her friends. She hadn't been planning to harm Emma by all accounts, but the intention didn't really matter at that point. The behavior was surveillance, it was stalking, and it terrified Emma in a way that nothing else had done. Emma, who had been cautiously optimistic about starting college, who had been healing from the trauma of the false accusation, suddenly regressed. She had panic attacks. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't feel safe. Bethany, meanwhile, was struggling in her own way. She was trying to comply with Yale's restorative justice program. She was trying to genuinely apologize to Emma to understand the harm she'd caused. But how could she do that while her mother was escalating, while her mother was being arrested repeatedly, while her mother was transforming into something unrecognizable and dangerous? It was Bethany who finally broke. She called James in early July. Just called him out of nowhere, having got his number from Emma, who'd gotten it from her mother. I need to talk to someone who isn't part of this, Bethany said. Someone who Karen targeted but who isn't Emma's family. Someone who might understand what this is like. What it's like to be the person who has to watch your parent become a monster because of choices you made. They met at a diner halfway between James's town and wherever Bethany was staying. She'd temporarily moved home from Yale, unable to focus on classes while everything was falling apart. Bethany was smaller than James had imagined. She was 18, legally an adult, but she looked like a girl playing dress-up in adult clothes. She ordered herbal tea and stared at her hands while she talked. "I didn't know what I was doing," she said. "Not really. I knew Emma hadn't done anything to me. I knew I was lying. But my mom, she made it seem like we were a team, like we were fighting against the world together. She made it seem important. She made it seem like Emma had done something wrong just by being successful, just by being the kind of person my mom couldn't be." James listened. "And then when it all came out, when it all went public, I was relieved," Bethany continued. "I thought, okay, now my mom will see what she's done. Now she'll understand that this wasn't okay." But instead, she just got angrier. Instead of being ashamed, she got more sure that she was right. She got more convinced that she was the victim. Bethany looked at him. Her eyes were red from crying. "I can't fix my mom," she said. "I've tried. I've apologized to Emma. I've admitted what I did. I'm doing everything Yale is asking me to do, but none of it matters because my mom won't accept that she was wrong. And I don't know how to exist as a person separate from her while she's doing this." "You're already doing it," James said quietly. "By being here, by admitting the truth, by trying to repair the harm, you're already separating yourself from her choices." "Is that enough?" Bethany asked. "Is that going to be enough to make her stop?" "I don't know," James said honestly. "But what I do know is that people like your mom, people who have been broken by life, who have decided the world owes them something, they don't stop because someone else stops trying. They stop when they hit actual, irreversible consequences, when they realize that fighting against reality isn't going to change reality." "What does that look like?" James thought about his pool. He thought about Karen floating on her inflatable lounger like she owned the place. He thought about all the ways that Karen had believed her own narrative so thoroughly that she couldn't see what was actually happening. "It looks like," he said slowly, "the moment when a person finally accepts that they can't win. Not because they gave up, but because they've exhausted every possible way to fight and none of them worked." Bethany was quiet for a long time. "I'm going back to Yale," she said finally. "My mom told me not to, told me that if I go back it means I'm abandoning her. But I'm going back anyway, and I'm doing the program, and I'm not going to skip classes or drop out or sabotage anything because my mom wants me to. I'm going to live my life, and she's going to have to deal with the fact that I've chosen something other than enabling her." "That's the right choice," James said. "And it's going to be hard, it's going to feel like betrayal even though it's not, but it's the right choice." Bethany left the diner that afternoon, driving back to her temporary home to pack for Yale. James sat in the booth for a while after she'd gone, staring at her empty teacup, thinking about the architecture of harm and how it perpetuated itself across generations, across relationships, across the fabric of families and neighborhoods. He thought about Karen, in whatever facility she was in now, probably still convinced that she was the wronged party. He thought about the way people like Karen could never quite accept that they'd lost because the losing itself was too incompatible with their self-image. But then, in late July, something unexpected happened. Karen was released from her psychiatric evaluation with a recommendation that she continue therapy and remain on prescribed medication. She'd apparently been compliant in the hospital, had taken her meds without complaint, had participated in group sessions, and had shown what the doctors described as genuine insight into her behavioral patterns. On paper, it looked like progress. What actually happened was that Karen had learned to lie more convincingly to psychiatrists than she had to the people in her actual life. She went quiet for 2 weeks. No calls, no appearances, no attempts at contact. James, Rachel, and the other families coordinated through email, wondering if this was genuine de-escalation or if it was strategic silence. Then in early August, James got a call from a lawyer he'd never heard of before. Her name was Margaret Stiles, and she was calling from a prestigious firm in the city. "I'm representing Karen Hendricks," she said briskly, "and I have a proposal that I think you'll be interested in." James's stomach clenched. "I'm listening." "My client is willing to agree to a comprehensive settlement," Margaret continued. She will voluntarily relocate to a different state. She will agree to a standing cease and desist order regarding all parties who have filed restraining orders against her. She will acknowledge in writing that she engaged in harassment and trespassing and that she accepts full legal and financial responsibility for her actions. In exchange, we're asking that all of the currently filed restraining orders be dropped, that all charges be cleared from her record, and that the families who have been involved agree not to pursue any further legal action. And if we don't agree, then she fights, Margaret said simply. She challenges every restraining order. She appeals every charge. She ties you all up in court for years. And she continues to exist in the legal gray areas where she currently occupies space, monitored, restricted, but still technically free to move through the world. James understood what was being offered. Not justice, not really, just an exit. A way for Karen to go away quietly and for everyone to move on. I need to talk to the others, James said. Of course, Margaret replied. I've been calling everyone. We're trying to coordinate a conference call for this weekend. Rachel called James that evening, her voice tight. She's running, Rachel said. She's finally accepted that she's lost, and now she's trying to buy her way out of the consequences. Isn't that what we want? James asked. For her to go away. It's what I wanted 3 months ago, Rachel said. But not like this. Not with her walking away unscathed, not with her record clean, not with her able to go to the next town and pretend like this never happened and start the whole cycle over with someone else. What do you want to do? Rachel was quiet for a moment. I want to call the others, she said. I want to see if we're united on this, and I want to make Karen an offer of our own. The conference call happened that Saturday morning. 12 families participated. 12 families that Karen had touched with her obsession, her accusations, her need to rearrange the world to fit her narrative. Rachel spoke first, laying out what was being offered and what it would mean. Then the others spoke, each family with their own story, their own damage, their own complicated feelings about accepting a settlement versus continuing to fight. In the end, the decision was almost unanimous. They would accept the settlement, but they would add conditions of their own. Karen would relocate, yes, but specifically, she would relocate to a small town in upstate New York that the families had identified. She would enroll in a specific therapist who specialized in personality disorders and obsessive behavior. She would submit to random psychiatric evaluations for 3 years. She would agree to a structured medication protocol. And this was the controversial part that took an hour of debate. She would agree to public community service, specifically working with other people dealing with damaged parent-child relationships, so that she could, in some small way, understand and help repair the kind of harm she'd caused. We're not trying to destroy her, Rachel told the others. We're trying to make sure she's never in a position to hurt anyone again. We're trying to heal the system, not just protect ourselves from her. Margaret, Karen's lawyer, came back on Monday with an almost resigned acceptance. Karen, apparently, was willing to comply with all conditions. She was ready to leave the state. She was ready to get help. The settlement was finalized by the end of August. Karen Hendricks packed a car, left behind a house that would be sold at market rate, the proceeds going to a pool restoration fund that Rachel had somewhat sarcastically established, and drove north toward her exile. James stood in his backyard on the day she left town, the day she left the state, and felt something finally release in his chest. 3 months into Karen's relocation, as fall settled into winter, the thing that James had learned living through this entire situation solidified into something like wisdom. Nothing is ever truly over. It just transforms into something else. James found this out on a Friday in November, when an unfamiliar number called his work phone. James Mitchell, a man's voice asked, deep measured with an undertone of something James couldn't quite identify. Yes. My name is Martin Hendricks. I'm Karen's ex-husband. I'm the judge I've heard you know about. I'm calling because something has come to my attention that I think you need to know. James felt his entire body go cold. How did you get this number? He asked. That's not important, Martin said. What's important is that Karen is violating the settlement agreement. She's already violated it in multiple ways that I can document, and I think you need to understand what that means before you decide what to do about it. I'm listening, James said. Martin explained it methodically. Karen had been supposed to relocate to upstate New York. According to the tracking that Martin had done, partly out of legitimate concern, partly out of the lingering resentment of a decades-old divorce, Karen had instead rented an apartment in a building in Connecticut, about 40 minutes from Emma's college. Karen had enrolled in a therapist, as required, but according to the therapist's notes that Martin had somehow obtained through legal channels, which raised certain ethical questions that James chose not to examine too closely, Karen had been lying systematically. She wasn't accepting her need for help. She was instead treating the therapy as an antagonist to be manipulated. And most damning, Karen had been maintaining contact with her daughter in ways that violated the spirit of the settlement, if not necessarily the letter. She'd been coaching Bethany on how to describe her role in the false accusation, how to frame it as youthful mistake rather than maternal coercion, how to present herself as a victim of an overly aggressive restorative justice program rather than as someone genuinely working toward accountability. "She's grooming her daughter again," Martin said bluntly. "She's convincing Bethany that they're the victims, that the entire settlement is an injustice, that Emma's family is vindictive. She's essentially beginning the process of rebuilding her narrative before the monitoring period even ends." "How do you know all this?" James asked. "Because I'm her ex-husband and I know how she thinks," Martin said. "And because Bethany called me, she's terrified. She knows her mother is violating the agreement, and she knows that if it comes out that Karen is in Connecticut instead of New York, it will destroy the settlement. It will destroy Bethany's chance at Yale. It will destroy everything." Martin paused. "Bethany asked me to call you. She asked me to tell you that her mother is planning something larger, something that involves pulling her away from Yale, convincing her that the family should unite against Emma's family, against the legal system, against everyone who's forced them to accept responsibility. She's planning to burn it all down rather than accept that she was wrong." James felt something sick twist in his stomach. "What does she want from me?" "She wants you to decide whether you're going to report the violation or whether you're going to use this information differently. She wanted you to understand the situation before you make that decision. And I'm calling you," Martin continued, "because I'm going to make a suggestion that might sound insane, but which I think is necessary." "What?" James asked carefully. "You're going to invite Karen back to your house," Martin said. "You're going to tell her that you want to negotiate something in private. You're going to record the conversation. And you're going to get her to explicitly admit to violating the settlement, to being in Connecticut instead of New York, to coaching Bethany on how to present a false narrative. And then you're going to have ironclad proof of her bad faith, and you can decide what to do with it." "That's absolutely illegal," James said. "Yes," Martin agreed calmly. "It is, but it's also the only way to get the evidence you need before she's in a position to hurt anyone else. The legal system has already shown itself to be slow and cumbersome when it comes to Karen. Sometimes you have to bend the rules a little to make sure the truth is protected." James hung up the phone without answering. He sat at his desk for the next hour, staring out the window of his office, thinking about the offer. He thought about Karen sitting in his pool, absolutely certain in her entitlement. He thought about Emma, finally healing, finally moving forward. He thought about Bethany, trapped between loyalty to her mother and recognition of her mother's toxicity. He thought about the ways that people like Martin justified breaking rules for the greater good. He thought about how that same logic had probably driven Karen to lie about Emma in the first place. And then he did something that he hadn't expected himself to do. He called Rachel. Rachel came to his house that Saturday morning. They sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while James explained what Martin had told him. "He's right," Rachel said quietly. "Karen is definitely in Connecticut. I've known for a month. I've been documenting it, but I wasn't sure what to do with the information." "How long have you known?" James asked. "Since September," Rachel said. "Emma's friends spotted her car in the parking lot of a building near campus. We hired a private investigator to confirm. She's not even pretending to try the New York relocation. She's just ignoring that part of the agreement and hopping no one notices." "And you didn't tell me." Rachel met his eyes. "Because I've been trying to decide if reporting it is the right thing," she said honestly. "Karen violated the agreement, yes, but reporting it means pulling Bethany back into legal proceedings. It means destroying the settlement framework that was supposed to protect her. It means Karen probably ends up in jail, which means Bethany loses her mother, which is actually what Bethany is calling you about, isn't it? James nodded. I talked to Bethany too, Rachel continued. She called Emma, told her the whole situation, and Emma called me. Bethany is terrified that her mother is going to be arrested again, that the whole thing is going to unravel, that she'll be blamed for whatever comes next. What do you want to do? James asked. Rachel took a long time to answer. I want to end this differently, she said finally. I want to end it not with Karen in jail and Bethany traumatized, but with Karen actually understanding what she's done, actually accepting it, actually choosing recovery instead of choosing a narrative where she's the victim of a conspiracy. How do you do that? You make her choose, Rachel said. You give her a real choice. Not Karen Hendricks the bully, not Karen Hendricks the liar. You give her Karen Hendricks the person. You tell her that you know she's violated the settlement, that you have proof that you could report her. But you also tell her that you're not going to. Instead, you're going to offer her something else. What? James asked warily. A real settlement, Rachel said. Not a legal one, a human one. You're going to tell her that you understand she's suffering, that you understand she's been broken by her divorce and her daughter's failures, and the ways the world refused to bend to her will. You're going to tell her that you're willing to let her rebuild, but only if she's willing to actually rebuild, to actually do the work, instead of just continuing the same patterns in a different location. That's insane, James said. She's a predator. She's a broken person who's been acting like a predator, Rachel corrected. And the only way to break that cycle is to give her a different option than fight everyone or hide. You give her the option of actually surrendering, actually accepting help, actually changing. James stood up and walked to the window. Outside, his pool was covered for winter, the blue tarp creating a sense of something sleeping, something waiting to be awakened. And if she refuses, he asked. Then you report the violation, Rachel said. You document everything, you work with Martin if you have to, and you make sure she faces consequences. But if she accepts, if she's willing to actually do the work, then maybe you save something, maybe you save her, maybe you save Bethany, maybe you actually break the cycle instead of just managing the symptoms. You're asking a lot of me, James said. I know, Rachel replied, but I think you're the person who can do this, because you're someone who's learned that Karen isn't just a villain, she's a person. And you've learned how to hold both of those truths at the same time. James contacted Martin, who provided him with Karen's Connecticut address. He wrote to her, using Martin as an intermediary, requesting a conversation. He kept the letter vague but specific enough that Karen would understand he knew something. Karen's response came 3 days later, a brief email. I'll meet you. Where? They arranged to meet at a neutral location, a small park halfway between his house and Karen's Connecticut apartment. A place with witnesses around, but also with enough space for a private conversation. It was the first week of December. The weather was cold, the kind of cold that made you want to be anywhere but outside. James waited on a park bench for 20 minutes before Karen arrived. She looked different than he remembered. Older, smaller, less performed. She was wearing practical clothes, jeans, a winter coat, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which was strange because she'd been divorced for years. She sat down on the bench without greeting him. You know, she said. Yes, James said. I know you're in Connecticut. I know you're not following the settlement agreement. I know you're in contact with Bethany in ways that suggest you're coaching her on how to present a revised narrative. Karen didn't deny any of it. She just sat there, her hands in her lap, staring at the bare trees. I couldn't stay away, she said finally. I tried. I was in New York for 3 weeks and I did everything right. I saw the therapist, I took the medication, I attended the community service sessions. But every day I was thinking about Bethany. Every day I was thinking about Emma. Every day I was thinking about how unfair this was, how I'd been punished for trying to protect my daughter. You weren't punished for protecting her, James said quietly. You were held accountable for harming someone else while protecting her. I know that, Karen said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she might actually mean it. I know that intellectually, but knowing something and accepting something are different things, and I couldn't accept it, so I came back. And I started spending time with Bethany, and it felt like we were finally understanding each other, finally united against the people who'd hurt us. Bethany called people, James said. She told them what you were doing. She's terrified of losing you, but she's also terrified of what you're becoming. Corinne's shoulders seemed to cave inward. "I know," she whispered. "She told me. She said if I didn't stop, she was going to have to report me to the court, that she couldn't be part of this anymore. And I told her that if she did that, then I was done with her, that I couldn't have a daughter who would abandon me." James felt something bitter crystallize in his mouth. He'd been hoping, foolishly perhaps, that Corinne was on some kind of path toward redemption. Instead, she'd simply replicated the same coercive pattern with her daughter. "I came to tell you something," James said. "And I need you to listen to me carefully. I have documentation of your violation of the settlement agreement. I have evidence that you've been coaching your daughter on how to revise her narrative. I have enough to report you to the court and ensure that you face real consequences, probably jail time, probably loss of custody, probably destruction of any chance you have at a relationship with Bethany on any terms other than the most broken ones." Corinne looked at him, her eyes sharp with fear. "But," James continued, "I'm not going to do that, not yet. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice that I hope you'll take seriously." James explained the offer. Corinne could continue the way she was going, hiding in Connecticut, coaching Bethany into complicity, slowly poisoning the only relationship she had left. And if she did that, James would report her and she would face consequences. Or, and this was the harder path, she could actually do what she said she was doing. She could go back to New York. She could genuinely engage in therapy, not to manipulate it, but to understand herself. She could distance herself from Bethany not to punish her, but to allow her daughter space to heal and grow independent. And she could do the real work of understanding how a person becomes the kind of person who destroys other people's lives in pursuit of vindication. "If you do that," James said, "if you do the actual work, then I won't report you. And in 2 years, when the monitoring period ends, you'll have a real chance at rebuilding. Not with Bethany necessarily, that might take years, but with yourself, with your own sanity and sense of meaning." "And if I refuse?" Corinne asked. "Then I go to court Monday morning," James said, "and I end this. And you lose everything, including any possibility of a relationship with your daughter that isn't completely destroyed." Corinne was silent for a very long time. "I'm 61 years old," she said finally. "I've lost my marriage, my dignity, my place in society. My daughter has publicly admitted that I coached her into lying. My reputation is destroyed. And now you're telling me that the only way to move forward is to accept all of that and try to become a different person." "Yes," James said. "That's unbearable," Corinne whispered. "I know," James said. "But the alternative is to keep doing what you've been doing, which is also unbearable, except it destroys other people along with yourself." Corinne put her hands over her face. "I don't know if I can do it," she said through her hands. "I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of change." "Then you have a choice to make," James said. "Not now, but soon, because I'm going to give you 2 weeks to decide. 2 weeks to think about whether you're going to go back to New York and actually do the work, or whether you're going to stay in Connecticut and continue the cycle. And at the end of those 2 weeks, I'm going to make my decision about whether to report you." James stood up. "For what it's worth," he said, "I hope you choose to change. Not for my sake, not for Rachel's sake, not for Emma's sake, but for Bethany's. She deserves a mother who's willing to be accountable instead of a mother who drags her down into the same pit she's living in." He walked away from the bench, not looking back, leaving Corinne sitting alone in the cold December air. James didn't hear from Corinne for 8 days. Then on a Wednesday evening his phone rang. It was Martin. "She did it," Martin said without preamble. "She went back to New York. She's re-enrolled in the program. She's in a different therapist's office. And this time she seems, I don't know how to describe it, she seems genuine, she seems willing." "How do you know?" James asked. "Because Bethany called me," Martin said. "She said her mother had come to see her on campus, and instead of trying to convince Bethany to drop out or join some kind of family alliance, Corinne had told her that she was wrong, that she'd been wrong about a lot of things, and that she was going to try to get better because Bethany deserved a mother who was sane, not a mother who was broken." "Did she say anything else?" "Yes," Martin said. "She told Bethany about her conversation with you. She told Bethany that someone had offered her a choice between destruction and redemption, and that she'd chosen redemption. Not because she wanted to, but because the alternative was unthinkable." James sat in silence for a moment. "I don't know if it's going to stick," he said finally. "I don't know if she's actually changed or if she's just found a new way to perform the role of the reformed woman." "Neither do I," Martin agreed. But the difference now is that we're all watching, and we're all documenting, and if she falls back into the old patterns, you know what to do. Report her, James said. Report her, Martin confirmed, but at least she was given a real choice. The winter that year was unusually mild. James reopened his pool earlier than expected, before spring had technically arrived. He floated on an inflatable raft, looking up at the sky, thinking about the strange geometry of justice. How it wasn't a straight line, but rather a series of intersecting moments where people either chose to be better or chose to continue being worse. He thought about Karen in New York, presumably in a therapist's office, presumably trying to untangle the decades of choices that had led her to the point where she'd nearly destroyed her daughter's life in pursuit of vindication against a girl who'd done nothing to her. He thought about Bethany, back at Yale, trying to do the restorative justice work while her mother was supposedly also doing work somewhere else, and wondering if it would ever be possible to have an actual relationship with her mother again. He thought about Emma, about to start her freshman year at Yale in the fall, carrying the weight of knowing that her very success had triggered a chain of events that had nearly destroyed multiple other people's lives. And he thought about himself, about the man he'd been when he first moved into this house, who just wanted to enjoy a pool in peace, and how that simple desire had expanded into something much larger and more complicated, into an entire education in the nature of harm and accountability and the possibility of change. The water in the pool was clear and blue and entirely his own. And for the first time since Karen had appeared in it, James felt like it might actually be possible to enjoy it without the specter of conflict haunting every moment of peace. Winter turned to spring. Spring became summer. Karen, according to the quarterly reports that Martin forwarded to James, was complying with all terms of the modified settlement. She was in therapy. She was on medication. She was attending her community service sessions. She was not in contact with Bethany except through scheduled, monitored calls with a therapist present. It looked like change. It felt temporary. James learned to live with the ambiguity. He redecorated his house. He took a vacation to Morocco. He started dating a woman named Sarah who worked in architectural design and who found his pool beautiful but not obsessively important. For the first time in months, his life felt like it belonged to him rather than to the residual echo of Karen Hendricks. Then in August, 3 weeks before Bethany was supposed to start her sophomore year at Yale, the email arrived. It came from Bethany directly, sent to James's personal email address. The subject line read, "My mother wants to meet with you. I think this time it's important." James met Rachel at her house to discuss it. Emma was there too, now 18, preparing for her freshman year at Yale, carrying herself with the carefully constructed confidence of someone who'd survived a trial by fire. "It could be a trap," Rachel said, packing her kitchen. "It could be Karen finding a new angle. There's no reason to trust her." "There's no reason not to meet with her either," Emma said quietly. "Mom, James, she's asked for a conversation. Maybe we should listen to what she has to say." Rachel and James exchanged a look. "I'll go," James said, "but I want to record it." "Is it still illegal?" Sarah asked. She was sitting on Rachel's counter, eating grapes, the calm voice of someone outside the situation. "Depends on the state," Rachel said. "New York is a two-party consent state, so if we're recording the conversation, we need Karen's permission." "So tell her you want to record it," Emma said, with the logic of someone who'd never understood why people found ways to complicate simple things. This time they met in Rachel's office. James brought Sarah. Rachel brought Emma. It was, in its way, a deliberate setup, showing Karen not just the people she'd wronged, but the ways in which she'd wronged them in the form of the actual people themselves. Karen arrived early, having driven down from upstate New York on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She looked like a person who'd been doing the work of healing. She was thinner than before, but not in a way that suggested deprivation. Her hair was entirely gray, no longer dyed. Her clothes were simple. She looked in many ways like someone's mother might look on a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary, unremarkable, entirely human. She stopped in the doorway of Rachel's office and seemed to shrink when she saw everyone there. "I wasn't expecting," she began. "I asked them to be here," Rachel interrupted, her tone not unkind but absolutely firm. "If you have something to say, you can say it in front of the people you've harmed." Karen nodded slowly and took a seat. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked like someone who'd been practicing for this conversation for a very long time. I requested this meeting because I've completed a significant milestone in my therapy, Corinne said, and her voice was steady in a way James hadn't heard before. My therapist, Dr. Reeves, helped me understand something that I've been unable to accept for my entire adult life. And I think I need to say it out loud to the people who are actually affected, not just to Dr. Reeves in a private office. She looked up at Emma. I want to apologize to Emma Coldwell, Corinne said. I coached my daughter into making a false accusation against you. I did this not because I believed the accusation, but because I believed that you represented a version of success and normalcy that I couldn't accept for myself. I wanted you to suffer because it made me feel less alone in my suffering. Emma's face was impassive, but James could see her hands gripping the arms of the chair. That was unconscionable, Corinne continued. It was harmful, it was unjust, and it was a symptom of a profound sickness in how I navigate the world. I want you to know that your suffering was real and that I caused it intentionally, even if my conscious mind was busy constructing narratives about justice. Corinne turned to Rachel. I want to apologize to you, Corinne said, for what I did to your family, for the accusation, for the campaign, for the way I tried to destroy your daughter's future. And more importantly, I want to apologize for the way I've continued to make your family responsible for my emotional well-being, even after I was given a clear legal framework for changing my behavior. Then Corinne looked at James. I want to apologize to you, she said, for the trespassing, for the harassment, for the way I treated your property as though it was mine to use, for the way I believed so firmly in my own narrative that I couldn't see you as a real person with legitimate boundaries. She took a shaking breath. I've spent the last 8 months in therapy with Dr. Reeves, Corinne said, and I've come to understand something that I think is important for you all to know. When my husband left me, when my daughter failed to live up to my expectations, when I found myself in this house that felt like a monument to my failure, I couldn't accept that these things were just things that happened. I couldn't accept that I wasn't the protagonist of my own story. So I created narratives where I was being wronged, where I was the victim of a conspiracy, where my suffering was justified by the suffering of other people. Corinne's voice cracked. I hurt people, she continued, because hurting them made my pain feel less arbitrary. It made me feel like I had agency. It made me feel like I understood why my life was the way it was. And it took me 8 months of therapy to understand that that's called a personality disorder and that it requires sustained, ongoing work to change. She looked directly at Rachel. I want Bethany to go to Yale, Corinne said. I want her to do the restorative justice program. I want her to live her life without the weight of my pathology dragging her down. And I want you to know that I've asked my therapist to increase my monitoring, to add additional accountability measures, because I'm no longer interested in fooling anyone, including myself, about how hard I'm going to have to work to become a person who doesn't hurt people. There was a long silence. Then Emma spoke. Do you want forgiveness? Emma asked, and her voice was curious rather than accusatory. Corinne looked at her. No, Corinne said. I don't think I deserve forgiveness. I think what I deserve is to spend the rest of my life understanding what I did and why I did it, and making sure I never do it again. If forgiveness comes, it will come when you're ready, not because I've asked for it. Okay, Emma said simply. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Rachel's backyard. I've spent the last 8 months being angry at you, Emma said without turning around. I've spent it imagining ways that you would finally understand how much damage you did, and then today I thought I would feel something different when you apologized, but I don't feel much of anything. I just feel tired. Emma turned back to face the room. That might mean I've processed it, she continued. Or it might just mean that I've carried it so long that I don't know how to put it down. Either way, I don't have it in me to forgive you today. But I also don't want to hate you forever. So I'm going to say this. If you keep doing the work, if you keep being accountable, if you keep showing up in this kind of difficult honesty, then maybe someday I won't feel angry anymore. And that will be enough. Corinne began to cry silently, her shoulders shaking but her face oddly peaceful, as though the tears were something she'd been waiting to shed for a very long time. Thank you, Corinne said. That's more than I deserve. After Corinne left, after the difficult conversation had ended and everyone had dispersed, Rachel back to her work, Emma back to her room to pack for college, Sarah and James driving back home in careful silence. James understood something crucial about the entire situation. Forgiveness and redemption weren't the same thing. Redemption was something you did for yourself. Forgiveness was something others granted you, and it could be withheld forever without being unfair. Karen was pursuing redemption. Whether she would ever receive forgiveness was not her choice. That evening, James stood in his pool for the first time since summer had officially arrived. The water was warm, and the evening was long, and the light was golden in a way that made everything feel possible. Sarah floated on an inflatable raft beside him, her eyes closed, her face tilted toward the setting sun. "Do you think she'll actually change?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," James said honestly. "People who have built their entire identity around being right have a lot of work ahead of them if they're trying to be wrong. But I think she's trying. I think that's actually the hard part, not succeeding at change, but being willing to do the work of changing in the first place." "And if she fails?" Sarah asked. "Then everyone will know," James said. "Because we're all watching now. That's the thing Karen didn't understand when she first started this. She thought she could exist outside of the community, above the rules that governed everyone else. But you can't actually do that. You can only pretend for a while before the reality catches up with you." The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. James floated on his back, looking up at the emerging stars, feeling something like peace for the first time since Karen had first appeared in his pool with her claim of entitlement. It wasn't the peace of victory. It was something quieter, something more real. It was the peace of someone who'd finally accepted that the world was complicated, that people were complicated, and that the only thing you could do was hold your boundaries and offer people the chance to change, while remaining vigilant about protecting yourself if they didn't. A year passed, then another. Time did what it always did. It carried everyone forward into lives that felt increasingly separate from what had happened before. Bethany graduated from Yale with a degree in social work, which seemed like a choice designed to either heal or be haunted by her past, depending on how you looked at it. She was back in contact with her mother, but carefully, with boundaries, with the kind of wariness that suggested she was always watching for signs of the old patterns returning. Emma thrived. She joined debate team her freshman year, started writing opinion pieces for the student newspaper, seemed to be constructing a version of herself that incorporated what had happened to her without being defined by it. She came to Rachel's house less frequently, which meant she was healing, which meant the entire machinery of damage and repair had successfully transformed her from a victim into a person. Karen maintained her therapy, stayed on her medication, showed up for her community service. According to Martin, who still occasionally forwarded updates, Karen had started facilitating a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents, which was either genuine growth or an elaborate form of performing redemption. James had long since accepted that he would never be entirely certain which. The settlement held, the restraining orders expired, the legal machinery that had been engaged fell silent. And James's pool remained his own. But then, in the fall of James's third year in the house, something unexpected happened. James was at work when his phone rang. It was the police department in the town where Karen now lived. She'd been arrested. Not for harassment, not for violation of restraining orders, not for any of the reasons James would have expected. She'd been arrested for fraud. Apparently, Karen had been working for an insurance company, helping customers with claims. And she'd been systematically helping her friends, women from her support group, commit insurance fraud. Nothing violent, nothing that directly harmed anyone physically. Just carefully orchestrated claims that inflated damages, exaggerated injuries, amplified suffering for financial gain. She'd been caught when one of the women in the group, feeling guilty and trying to break free from Karen's influence, had gone to the police herself. The detective who called wanted to know if James had ever suspected Karen of this kind of behavior, if he had any historical information that might be relevant to understanding her pattern of deception. James said no, and then James asked a question of his own. "Is she going to jail?" "Probably," the detective said. "The evidence is solid and she's already confessed. Her lawyer is trying to argue that she was under psychological duress, that her mental health crisis led her to poor judgment, but judges don't tend to be sympathetic to that argument when it comes to financial crimes." After he hung up, James sat at his desk for a very long time. He felt something that might have been anger, might have been resignation, might have been something more complex. A recognition that redemption, genuine redemption, might not actually be possible for people like Karen. That change might be a performance that could be maintained for years, could feel real, could convince everyone, including Karen herself, that something fundamental had shifted, and then could collapse under the weight of the original wound that nothing had ever actually healed. He called Rachel that evening. "I heard," Rachel said before he could speak. "Martin called me. He's devastated. He apparently thought his ex-wife had finally gotten it together." "Did you believe it?" James asked. "When she came to the office and apologized, did you believe she was changing?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I believed she was trying," Rachel said finally. "I believed that she meant the words when she said them, but I never believed that the trying would be enough. I've known too many people like Karen. They can change their behavior for a while, but the underlying drive to bend the world to their will, to make themselves feel less alone by making other people suffer, that's not something that therapy fixes. That's something that requires a person to fundamentally accept that they're not the center of the universe, and people like Karen can't do that. They can pretend to do it, but they can't actually do it." "So what was the point?" James asked. "Of everything, the settlement, the conversations, the chance we gave her to change." "The point," Rachel said quietly, "was that we gave her the chance. And we documented what happened when she refused to take it. We didn't destroy her. The system didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. And that's actually important because it means that Bethany gets to see her mother's consequences as the result of her mother's choices, not as a conspiracy against her. It means Emma gets closure. It means we all get to move forward without wondering if we were the ones who caused this." James understood what Rachel was saying, but it didn't quite ease the bitter taste in his mouth. Bethany took a leave from her social work job to deal with her mother's legal situation. She hired a lawyer. She testified that her mother had been pressuring her to also participate in insurance fraud, that she'd refused, that her mother had called her ungrateful and threatened to cut her out of her life. And James, sitting in the courtroom as a character witness, because Martin had asked him to, watched Bethany make these statements about her own mother with the kind of flat, exhausted expression that suggested she'd been waiting her entire life to finally say these things out loud. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. The judge, in sentencing her, noted that she seemed to be someone for whom external monitoring and court-ordered therapy had been the only things preventing her from returning to destructive patterns. The judge noted that this suggested a fundamental character issue, not simply a situational crisis, and that accordingly, Karen would be spending time in prison not as punishment, but as a necessity. "You have constructed an entire life around bending reality to match your narrative," the judge said, looking directly at Karen. "And when reality refuses to bend, you find new victims. A therapist can't fix that. A support group can't fix that. Only genuine acceptance of your own powerlessness can fix that, and I don't see evidence that you've achieved that." Karen didn't speak in her own defense. She just sat there in the courtroom, her expression unreadable, accepting her sentence with the same kind of eerie calm she'd brought to the settlement meeting a year and a half earlier. James wondered, watching her, if anything had actually changed at all. If all of the therapy, all of the seeming growth, all of the careful reconstruction of herself as a person willing to be accountable, if any of it had been real, or if she'd simply been performing redemption the way she'd performed victimhood, the way she'd performed entitlement, waiting for the moment when the performance could end and she could go back to her actual nature. The bitter truth was that James would never know for certain. That was perhaps the cruelest part of the entire situation. Karen had forced herself into James's life, had forced him to engage with her narrative, and she had never given him the gift of clear, conclusive proof of what she actually was, what she actually believed, whether she was capable of genuine change. After Karen was sentenced, and after the courtroom had emptied, James walked out into the autumn afternoon. The trees were turning. The light was that particular shade of golden amber that only comes in fall, and the world felt both exactly the same and entirely different. He thought about his pool, sitting in his backyard, empty for the winter. He thought about Karen floating on an inflatable raft, absolutely certain of her right to be there. He thought about all the conversations and the settlements and the surveillance and the therapy and the redemption arc that had seemed, for a moment, like it might actually work. And he thought about Emma, starting her junior year at Yale, no longer defined by what had happened to her because she'd done the harder work of including it in her story rather than being consumed by it. He thought about Bethany, rebuilding her life separate from her mother's chaos, trying to be a person in her own right instead of an extension of her mother's pathology. He thought about Rachel, who'd spent the energy and resources and emotional capacity to make sure that the people she loved were protected, and to make sure that the person who'd threatened them understood the consequences of that threat. And he thought about himself, standing in the autumn light, watching season change to season, understanding finally that closure wasn't something that happened and then was done. It was something you carried with you, something that you wove into the fabric of who you became. James went home to his empty pool. He looked at it for a long time, at the tarp covering the blue water beneath, at the space where Karen had once floated with such casual entitlement, so certain of her right to the things that weren't hers. And then he turned away and walked back into his house, closing the door behind him. The pool would be there next summer. The water would be clean, and he would be able to enjoy it without the specter of Karen Hendricks haunting every moment of peace. That wasn't victory, it was something quieter and more real. It was just life continuing, the way it always did after you survived something terrible. He didn't do it because of Karen. He did it because he'd gotten a job offer in California, and Sarah had gotten into architecture graduate school at Stanford, and they decided to build a life together in a place where the sun shone differently and the weight of the past didn't cling to every corner. The new owners were a family with 2 children who wanted a pool for birthday parties and summer afternoons. James showed them the maintenance schedule, explained the chemical balance, pointed out the new equipment he'd installed. He didn't mention Karen Hendricks. He didn't mention the trespassing or the legal battles or the way she'd tried to claim ownership of something that wasn't hers. That story belonged to James now, not to the pool. The real estate agent asked him at closing if there was anything else the new owners should know about the house. James thought for a moment, and then he said no, nothing important. He signed the papers, collected the check, and walked out of the house for the last time. In the backyard, the pool gleamed in the California-bound sunshine, ready for new swimmers, ready for new stories, ready to be just a pool again instead of the epicenter of a moral drama that had played out across years. Karen Hendricks was 4 years into her 5-year sentence. Emma Coldwell was graduating from Yale in the spring with a degree in political science and a plan to law school. Bethany Hendricks was working at a nonprofit that helped people exit emotionally abusive family situations, drawing on her own experience to guide others toward freedom. And James Mitchell was driving toward a new life, leaving behind the ghost of a woman who tried to claim his pool and had nearly claimed his peace in the process. The irony, which James understood as he drove down the highway toward California, was that Karen had been right about one thing: the pool should have been shared. Not in the way she'd meant, not as a right she was entitled to, but in the way that everything becomes shared eventually, becomes part of the world, becomes part of other people's stories. His interaction with Karen had changed him. It had made him understand human nature in ways he hadn't before. It had taught him that entitlement and victimhood were often 2 sides of the same coin, that people who'd been broken by life could cause terrible damage in their attempts to make the world acknowledge and repair their damage. And it had taught him that sometimes the most important thing you could do was refuse to play the role that someone else had written for you. Karen had written a story where James was supposed to be the unreasonable new neighbor, the person who didn't understand community, the person who was too selfish to share. But James had refused that role. He'd insisted on being the person with the agency, with the boundaries, with the power to decide who got access to his space and on what terms. And in that refusal, he'd broken the only narrative Karen actually understood, the narrative where she was the victim and everyone else was conspiring against her.